Gaza has food insecurity. Gaza has wells that have been destroyed, so people don't have access to basic water. Gaza has hospitals destroyed. Gaza has all the schools destroyed. Gaza has 70, if not now 80% of the built environment destroyed. There are 8 to 10,000 people laying under rubble in Gaza. And as awful as it was, the one thing that the humanitarian experts said, the one thing the legal experts say, the one thing that the military experts say is that the thing that might be irreversible, the thing that might be the most destructive, the thing that might be the most calamitous would be if they were to invade Rafah. Now, some of y'all watch the show every night and you understand what's going on in Rafah, but you have to understand, at every moment, the Palestinian people in Gaza have been chased out of their homes. They've had their homes destroyed. They have been forced to run from pillar to post. If you look in the north, they were evacuated very early in October and November, and they were told that there were humanitarian corridors, but there were not. I mean, there were some, but even in the corridors, people got killed. They said they would give people notice, but they didn't. The point is they got moved from the north to the center. And then there were people in the center who got moved from the center to the south. And so Palestinians are not only been dispossessed and dislocated from their homes, but they have nowhere to go. And they all ended up in Rafah, a city that, again, is supposed to hold 250,000 people. Rafah has like 1.5 million, 1.6 million at its peak a couple weeks ago. And even at that moment, where all the Palestinians are packed into Rafah, again, 2.2 million people live in Gaza on a normal day. 2.2 million. And 1.5 of them are living in this tiny, tiny town. The whole thing is 25 miles tall, 5 miles wide. And you got all these people living in this tiny, 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 tiny space. And then Netanyahu says, well, I think there's some Hamas in there. I'm going to invade. And then they invade. Now, Germany said don't invade. France said don't invade. Italy said don't invade. Even America on the low said don't invade. Humanitarian organizations said don't invade Rafah because it is a humanitarian calamity. It will result in mass destruction. This is why Netanyahu is full of it. This is my frustration, right? Because he did it anyway. And they, on Sunday, the Israeli Defense Forces launched a strike attack, right? And the claim from the Israeli government was this strike attack is going to kill 2 Hamas leaders. 2. So they said, these are some high-ranking Hamas leaders. We're going into Rafah, and we're going to kill those 2 Hamas leaders. That is the alleged plan. But the strike attack, which was from the air, it had far more devastating impact. 45 Palestinian civilians were killed. Hundreds of Palestinian civilians were injured. But let's just focus on the dead right now. 45 Palestinian civilians were killed from this airstrike. Let's say Israel was correct and there were 2 Hamas leaders, and these are the worst people ever. They just had to go. You traded 2 Hamas leaders for 45 innocent Palestinians. Now, I know some of y'all on the right, some of y'all who are Zionists, some of y'all elsewhere are going to say, well, how do you know they're innocent? That's the standard, bro. That's the effing standard. We don't assume that because you're Palestinian and outside, you're guilty. There is no reason to believe that these unarmed civilians were anything but unarmed civilians. And until you prove otherwise, and there is no proof otherwise, 45 Palestinian civilians were killed, hundreds were injured to get these 2 Hamas leaders. And do you know why? Because they struck Tal Al-Sultan Mukhayyam, or camp, right? They struck a shelter camp. I don't know how else I can say this. Let me put it differently. Remember all them people I said were in the north and in the center? They got kicked out and pushed out. Remember them? Remember them? They ended up in Rafah, and they ended up in this camp. And the idea was, in this camp, you are safe. The people were told they were safe. Israel said they were safe. Hamas said they were safe. Palestinian civil society said they were safe. The sign said they were safe. The camp said they were safe. These people should not have had any threat on them. None. And yet 45 of them were killed. The whole world was outraged. Again, I ain't met a person, let me take that back. I ain't met a normal, humane person yet that didn't say this one was bad. Even Netanyahu himself said, yo, I effed this one up. He said this was a, quote, tragic mishap. Egypt, which frankly, has been a lapdog of Israel for way too long. The European Union, which is starting to stand up and step up. We'll talk about that in a second. The International Court of Justice. Remember, the ICJ just told Israel not to invade Rafah in the first place. Everybody said this was awful. This was indefensible. This was morally atrocious. All of that happens. Netanyahu says, you know what? This was a tragic mishap. But here's the thing about Netanyahu that you will see consistently, and then I'll leave this thing alone. He'll say one thing in English and another thing in Hebrew. And why do I point that out? It's not to say that he's some sneaky, crafty, there's no trope here, because I know people are always looking for excuses to smear people who have a critique of Israel. What I'm saying is that he has a domestic argument and he has an international argument. It's been like that I remember covering him at Huffington Post 15 years ago or 12 years ago. And Netanyahu would say, I believe in a two-state solution whenever he was talking to American TV in English. And then when you follow him on a campaign trail and hear his speeches in Hebrew, he'd be saying, we'll never do a two-state solution. He is literally lying to the world, or he's lying to his country. And nothing about his practices show he's lying to his country. He's lying to us. So on the same day that he said this is a tragic mishap, we're going to investigate it, do you know what he said to his own people? He said, we're going to keep the mission going until, quote, every goal has been achieved. He showed no remorse. He showed no regret. He wasn't upset. He ain't look upset. The boy was happy. I ain't gonna say he was happy, but I will say he wasn't. He ain't look sad. So Netanyahu, after killing 45 people in his military did, after seeing real beheaded children, not the fake ones that they told you about months ago, and I'm sure some kids were harmed in October 7th. There were some awful things that happened. Hamas did something. I mean, there were just atrocious war crimes that were committed. There's no doubt about that. I don't want us to ever pretend that there weren't. All those stories about beheaded babies, 40 beheaded babies. I ain't seen 40 beheaded babies, and neither of y'all. But I tell you one thing, there were beheaded babies yesterday. There were beheaded babies on Sunday. And somehow the international community didn't feel the need to make a spectacle. International community didn't put it on the front headline of every major corporate media.
Dual attacks.
You know what they did?
Assisted by volunteers,
are pulling the minimum level of critique possible.
In Al-Fallujah is more than
ونحن نتحدث لليوم السابع عشر على التوالي ما زالت العملية
for the 7th.
I was going to give y'all the translation of that, but it sounded like y'all got it. But like, and just look at this. Those were buildings. Those were homes. Those were structures in Palestinian civil society. All of it reduced to rubble. And remember, there are 8,000 people. Somebody's baby, somebody's friend, somebody's husband is underneath some of that rubble. This is a moral atrocity. It's indefensible.